The ethno-historical ideas just summarized by Chris Castledine lay the foundation for the next two presentations. They reconstruct the ideas that two ancient Midwestern Hopewell societies had about the journeys taken by soul-like essences of the deceased to an afterlife. Both case studies document the specific idea that soul-like essences were conceived of as birds or as being carried by birds and flying to an afterlife. The first of these papers is by Professor Anna Novotny, a bioarchaeologist at Texas Tech University. Her presentation is entitled Souls in Flight, a Scioto Hopewell ritual drama about the journey of souls of the deceased to an afterlife.
Good evening. 22 years ago, while pursuing a different research project, Christopher Carr came across unpublished photographs of peculiarly positioned burials interred under Hopewell mounds in the Scioto Paint Creek area. For example, here cremated remains laid out in a symmetric arc with a conch shell at each end. Here, cremated remains arranged systematically in 3 parallel rectangles and 2 circles. And here, one of 8 supine skeletons that were repeatedly positioned with their arms flexed at the elbow and their legs flexed at the knees, rather than arranged at the side of the body, like most interments. This discovery led Carr and me to examine all published and unpublished photographs of Ohio Hopewell cremations and inhumations, and to inventory all anomalously arranged interments. Over many years, I made detailed taphonomic studies of the interments to determine whether these unusual arrangements resulted from intentional mortuary practices or natural formation processes. Meanwhile, Carr searched ethno-historical literatures on Woodland and Plains Indian religious concepts and rites to illuminate possible native meanings of the arrangements. Today I focus on the 8 skeletons with flexed arms and legs. My taphonomic studies found that all 8 individuals were positioned in the flesh. Their positions did not result from movements of bone during decomposition, by rodents or water, or by other natural processes. To anticipate our cultural interpretation, we conclude that the 8 skeletons were arranged to have the form of birds in flight, with the flexed arms analogous to the extended wings of a flying bird, and the flexed legs analogous to the spread tail feathers of a flying bird. The layouts were used by Hopewell Indians to convey the plots of theatrical dramas that enacted the flight of a deceased person's soul to the afterlife. As an example of our work, I present the scenes in the drama performed in Charnel House C under Mound 25 at the Hopewell site. The drama would have begun at the sides of adjacent burials 34 and 35. Both were laid out with their heads approximately to the north, implying north as the initial direction of travel of the deceased's soul. Burial 34 is a supine, extended skeleton with a mica cutout effigy of a headless, extended human placed as though emerging, feet first, from the cranium of the deceased. The cranium of burial 34 serves the dual role of head of the deceased and head of the cutout. We interpret the assemblage as a representation of one of the souls of the deceased, likely his free soul, leaving his head. The head is one of the 2 most common bodily locations where historic Woodland and Plains Indians thought the free soul to reside. Burial 35 is a supine, extended skeleton that was placed adjacent and parallel to burial 34, again with its head to the north. The nature of burial 35 supports the interpretation of burial 34 as expressing the emerging soul of a deceased person. Placed at the head of burial 35, and perhaps constituting part of a headdress, was a copper cutout effigy of a composite being with a human face, the body of a creature with wings extended, as in flight, and a long, prehensile tail. Together, the two burials can be interpreted, respectively, as representing a classic shaman who has laid down parallel to a dying person, gone into trance, and taken a soul flight by transforming into a flying creature. By these means, the shaman is helping the person release his soul, and perhaps is beginning to guide the person's soul on its journey to an afterlife. Lying in a trance next to a patient is a method that is very commonly used across cultures by shamans to perform spiritual tasks like healing a client's soul, retrieving it, or guiding it somewhere. Proceeding north and counterclockwise around Charnel House C, the ritual would have continued at the sides of adjacent burials 41A, 41B, 41C, and 45A. All four individuals in burials 41 and 45 were placed with their heads approximately to the east, implying a change in the direction of the path to the east for this part of the journey. 3 of these 4 burials were laid out supine with arms and/or legs akimbo, like spread bird wings or tail feathers, suggesting the flight of the free soul of the deceased. Selected foot bones were removed from each foot of burial 41A, the same bones on each foot, giving the impression of the front 3 talons of a bird's foot and reinforcing the theme of a soul's flight as a bird. This interpretation of the bioarchaeological evidence makes good sense in light of common historic Woodland and Plains Indians beliefs. These beliefs include that a human being's soul in life has the form of a bird. The soul transforms into a bird upon exiting the body at death, and that the soul of a deceased person is carried by a bird to an afterlife. The interpretation is also supported by Scioto Hopewell ceremonial paraphernalia, like this sculpture of a hawk with the head of a human carved on the hawk's head. Burial 41A was accompanied by a limestone cone placed between the knees. Because cones were commonly used in games among historic woodland and plains Native Americans, the cone may have expressed that gaming occurred along the journey, and possibly that gaming was a distraction or a challenge that could keep a journeyer from reaching the afterlife. Distractions of and challenges to souls of the deceased are perennial elements of historic Woodland Indian narratives about the journey taken by souls to an afterlife, gambling in particular having been told of by the Miami. The drama would have continued yet farther counterclockwise within Charnel House C at burials 43 and 47A and 47B. Burial 43 is the cremated remains of an adult and a child combined and sculpted into an ark with a marine conch shell at either end. An elongated turtle shell ornament spans the space between the two ends of the ark. The layout is reminiscent of the Arc of the Milky Way, as it was widely known to historic Woodland and Plains Indian tribes, with its two ends reaching down to the ocean waters, represented by the marine conchs, beyond the shore of this world, Turtle Island, represented by the turtle shell ornament. Here, the Milky Way arc most probably represented part of the path taken by souls of the deceased to an afterlife. Given the mortuary context of the sculpture, and given that this meaning was often attributed to the Milky Way by historic Woodland and Plains Indians. Also telling is the fact that cremations of the deceased themselves were used to make this sculpture of the Milky Way as a path of souls. Adjacent to burial 43 were burials 47A and 47B, a pair of side-by-side supine extended inhumations. They continue the theme of a soul's journey to an afterlife. The two individuals and the rectangular platform on which they lay were oriented east-west, with their heads to the west, suggesting a shift in the direction of the journey to the west. Further, Burial 43, the Milky Way sculpture, was positioned west of burials 47A and 47B, suggesting that they mounted the Milky Way and traveled upward as well as west as part of their death journey, as told in so many Indian legends. Above and close to the cranium of burial 47A was placed an ocean shell container. To the southwest and close to the cranium of burial 47B was laid the famous mica cutout effigy of a human hand. On the chests of both individuals was a mica cutout effigy of a raptor's claw and very lower leg. Burial 47A held in its hand an exquisitely knapped, 7-inch long spear point or knife made of rare amber-colored chalcedony. The most convincing interpretation of burials 47A and 47B is that, after journeying on the Earth and subsequently along the Milky Way toward the ocean, here represented by the ocean shell, the deceased reach an obstacle, which they cross with the helping hand of another person, represented by the mica effigy human hand. The Chippewa tell of the deceased crossing a stream with the helping hand of an unknown person who reaches across from the opposite side. The mica effigy raptor claws and long knife recall Alabama and Seminole tales of the deceased's encounter with a large bird or birds along the Milky Way that try to impede the deceased's progress to the land of the dead or to eat the deceased. The deceased must fight off the birds with a weapon, either burnt wood or a long knife. In the Hopewell version, the raptor's legs would have been severed in the confrontation. The ritual drama would have continued, or possibly ended, 3/4 of the way around the Charnel House, going counterclockwise, at burial 42. This individual was again positioned with arms semi-flexed, still indicating the flight of the soul, but now to the south-southwest, the direction of burial 42's head. Near the top of burial 42's skull was an earthen altar-like mound on which was constructed a mica effigy of a human head in a fez-like headdress. The identity of this character and the nature of the encounter with him or her are unknown. Beyond the many ethno-historical narratives cited here, additional support for the interpretation that the interments in Charnel House C represent a dramatization of the deceased's journey to an afterlife is found in the movement of the drama and in the positioning of the bodies relative to one another. 3 patterns are relevant. First is the changes in course of the death journey expressed by the burials. From north to east to west to south-southwest. These changes in direction are within the range of those reported by some historic woodland and plains Native Americans. Some narratives involve multiple changes in direction. The changes can involve a reversal in direction, as in the shift from eastern travel to western travel in Charnel House C. Second, in the historic northern woodlands and plains, counterclockwise circuits were typically used in ceremonies of death, in contrast to clockwise circulation used in rites pertinent to normal life. The counterclockwise movement in Charnel House C, a context of death, aligns with this general pattern. A third archaeological pattern that supports our reconstruction is that the burials that appear to depict journeying souls of the deceased vary sequentially in their body positions, in ways that might have expressed stages of transformation from human physical form into bird-human soul form. The mica cutout human effigy emerging from the skull of the first burial in the sequence, burial 34, is rendered with its legs rotated outward and knees spread wide, suggesting initial transformation of the deceased's soul into a flying bird, the formation of tail feathers spread for flight. The next burial, 41A, had its foot bones modified to resemble bird talons. Moving to the upper body, the next 4 burials, 41B, 41C, 45A, and the last in the sequence, 42, were placed with their arms akimbo, like spread wings, a more visible sign of transformation of human into bird and of bird flight. The extended burials 47A and 47B seemingly stray from the developmental sequence of bodily transformation. However, a careful reading of historic Upper and Lower Great Lakes Indian death journey narratives shows them to often involve shifts in point of view, from that of the living, who look to the sky and tell of flying souls, to that of the deceased, who experience the journey as walking. Extended burials 47A and 47B can be understood in this historic narrative style. They focused on depicting events and characters met by the deceased along the journey, rather than the condition of soul flight, which, at this point in the sequence, is already established. If we are to understand Scioto Hopewell peoples and the material world they created, it is necessary to consider not only the symbolic meanings of the burial layouts in Charnel House C, but also the motivations that produced them. The drama may have instructed the deceased in detail about the nature of the journey to the afterlife, its challenges and challengers, and the effective means for dealing with them. The drama may also have encouraged the deceased through those challenges, afforded them strength, provided them with food, warmth, and light for the journey, and/or cleared the way, as did speeches to the deceased in the 4 nights' wake of the medicine rite of the historic Winnebago, and the death rites of many other tribes. Globally, rituals for instructing or reminding the deceased about how to get to an afterlife are also a common practice. Thank you for listening.